Oh, hold on. Yeah. I'm sorry. It must be about Pendulum, which I don't know why he made a Pendulum video. It's like nothing new going on with Pendulum, right?
Pendulum. Pendulums were invented in the year 1 AD when a man named Fuko famously quipped, "Special summoning is much like a prison." Alright, today we're talking about these cards. I know I'm one of Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest haters, but for some reason I have a soft spot in my heart for pendulums. I've played
Why?
pretty much every pendulum archetype and taken a significant amount of them to high-level tournaments. I didn't do so good, though. So why do I want to talk about Pendulum today? Well, as Draco Slayer dribbles into Master Duel, more individuals than ever are experimenting with these weird cards that are sometimes monsters, but sometimes spells. This is happening at the same time a larger discussion is brewing among potential new players about how complex Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, and for a lot of those players, pendulums are the poster child for that complexity. I'd like to spend today talking about Pendulum as a noun, the archetype, what it means for Yu-Gi-Oh!, the specific design issues it presents, and how Konami can circumvent those in the future. And we're gonna do our best not to play the one Triff clip over and over again.
Anyone with a brain would realize it was a joke.
In short,
Pendulum.
let's talk about the problem with Pendulum. Breaking this shit into 4 sections. First section is complexity. So discussion of Pendulum has to begin with their genesis in the set that changed everything, Duelist Alliance. At the time that this released, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was doing fine. Yu-Gi-Oh's always doing fine. We have a really easy time retaining players, but a really hard time getting new players in. So when a new series starts, that's a unique opportunity to potentially simplify the game to a state at which players now feel that they can get into it. And for what it's worth, Duelist Alliance did a lot right. Sure.
Is that a thing? Chat, do you like wait until a game has I guess kind of a new series to get into it? I've never heard of that in my entire life. Granted, I only play one card game, but like, is that a thing? Because I mean, do people say like, oh, Magic's entering a new generation, time to start playing now? I didn't want to enter 6 months ago because they weren't quite at the end. In Magic, you do. We add new mechanics. How is it easier? I just, what MBT said just didn't make any sense to me. Like, okay, if you have set rotation, then it makes perfect sense. It's like, damn, dude, this block is really bad. I don't like these 4 sets. I'm just gonna wait until next. Like, that makes perfect sense, chat, in a set rotation game. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, I've never heard someone be like, you know what? They added XC. Now's a good time to jump into Yu-Gi-Oh. I didn't like that sync. Like, that doesn't really happen.
Or the decks that were released were complex in a way that cards had not been.
MVT truly stuck on his rotation. It's press 1 if it literally just always is about set rotation. This man will not quit until set rotations. It just always goes back to that.
In the past, but they were also super fun, played at wall combo speeds, functionally reset the metagame, and introduced the pace of play that we enjoy today with decks like Shaddoll and Burning Abyss, which are still occasionally playable. What, 8 years later? 9 years? Let me just go on Glasgow Yu-Gi-Oh's YouTube. Previously, each new summoning mechanic had of course led to waves of boomers claiming that this was the end for Yu-Gi-Oh! And they were stepping away. Synchros, is this addition in my game? I have to add up numbers? Xyz, where do the materials go? Too difficult to understand. But Pendulum was the first time that there was actually meat to the argument. See, these are really complex to explain to new players. If you're unfamiliar, Pendulum monsters have both a monster effect and a scale effect. These effects can be activated while it's put into one of 2 Pendulum zones, which were added to the board with the release of this set and Master Rule 3. Once per turn, you can perform a Pendulum summon, during which you can summon any number of monsters from your hand or face-up extra deck with a level between the 2 numbers on your pendulum scales. That's right, the face-up extra deck also exists now. When a pendulum card is destroyed, it is not sent to the graveyard, but...
That's why it's just like, do people really not understand why this is such a bad mechanic? And it should have never been, like, we should have never, I have no idea. There was a time, chat, before Sofa Chords got released, when I actually thought Konami was just not gonna release any more pendulums, and I was so happy. And then they made Sofa Chords, and then they made the Draco Slayers, and it's like, why do we still support this mechanic? It's such a bad mechanic from every single perspective, which they had to change the rules for and adjust the scale. They had to change 2 rules for the fucking mechanic already. They've never had to do that with like well, you know what? You can't use tokens for they've never had to do that. They did it twice for Pendulum. It's such a bad mechanic. Like, it shouldn't exist.
Was in fact returned to the top of the extra deck, at which point it can be pendulum summoned on a future turn. That explanation is difficult, but it's the tip of an iceberg of super unintuitive discussions and rulings. Pendulum cards are both monsters and spell traps depending on what position or location they are in. That means that cards that interact with spells or monsters will have different applications based on how the pendulum card is being played. Replacement effects for moving location, like those on Dimensional Fissure, do override Pendulum's ability to go to the face-up extra deck because those cards have an innate replacement effect that applies when they would go to the graveyard, though they are not doing so. The numbers are weird. There's 2 of them, which implies that at some point there would be one with 2 different numbers. Otherwise, why would you put 2 numbers on it? But they're never...
Why are there 2 numbers on the scales? Is it just, like... Is this supposed to be a microcosm of a pendulum scale? It's of, like, a full pendulum itself? Like, why are there 2 numbers? There's no pendulum with 2 different numbers. Like, what's the point? Left and right? Okay, but what purpose does that serve though? If it's always the same number, what does it matter if it's left or right? You could just have a PS number. Like, it doesn't. They never. Yeah, do you know what level? I feel like that was something that they were like, we might go somewhere with this, and then they were just like, nope. We want to leave the door open for like there to be a weird pendulum. You know, like maybe Zark was I guess Zark's a little too late in the game. It's like the last set. But, like, what was the point? This is one part that, this is the one part they thought would confuse people, aka, I'm just saying, it's just why? Like, this whole mechanic is fucking stupid.
Never was. It was always just the same number twice. The pendulum zones themselves were really weird. They're not spell and trap card zones. They're locations that you can put additional cards if your hand is too full. What's the point? Oh, and if you have a mat that existed before 2014, sorry, it doesn't work anymore. The most frustrating part of all of this is, despite this complexity, there was a ton of design space just sort of left on the cutting room floor. Pendulum decks early did one thing and one thing only: summon a bunch of monsters to perform a big monster combo. The fear among players is that this would eventually result in a deck that was exclusively starters and extenders, all of which had pendulum scales, which leads me to 2. It's a big club and you're not in it. So famously, Konami employee and designer of the best Yu-Gi-Oh product ever conceived, rest in peace Matt Bell, we hardly knew ye, claimed that one of the issues with Pendulum was every new Pendulum design had the potential to be a part of this big Pendulum soup archetype that contained only the good cards from 6 or 7 years of card design. Functionally, Pendulum was one big archetype, and any new Pendulum card could be played within it.
Like
that makes designing cards really difficult. When the Pendulum cards first released in Duelist Alliance, Konami was originally very scared about them. This can be seen with the Qliphort monsters. This first playable series of Pendulum monsters all have text on them that prevents you from special summoning anything but Qliphorts. You're not going to be accessing anything other than the monsters that
This is another point. At what point did Konami just be like, you know how we made massive restrictions on the first penned archetype that wasn't in the anime, and it was still meta? Let's just not do that anymore. Like, why? Like, Qliphort chat is like the only Pendulum like archetype that has like hard restrictions on it, and then they just like stopped. They were just like, let's just let them fucking let them eat cake. You know what I mean? Of these actors. I just, you know, like, Qlis have restrictions on them. Why don't the other Pendulum ones do? Why don't Performa Pals? I mean, I can kind of get Performa Pals because, like, it's the anime. You need your anime character to just be able to do whatever the hell he wants. You know what I mean? Zephyra kind of does. Well, it's basically just sounding like dual terminal ones then.
This archetype contains. This was a type of effect that not only had never been seen before, it had not been designed around in previous sets. Because you could theoretically special summon any monster from your hand, a whole bunch of monsters that were balanced around needing to be tribute summoned suddenly weren't. The player base was scared about this too, and early attempts to break Pendulum mostly revolved around cheating out really powerful 1 or 2 tribute monsters. This fear would eventually be realized with a significant series of ARG format tops in which the Ignite monsters were used used to pendulum summon stuff like Jinzo. In the grand scheme of things, that's not particularly powerful, but you gotta understand this was at a time when Satellar Knight was a top deck. But you can't just print a Xenolock on every new piece of archetypal support forever. So eventually, Konami relented. By the time the first of Pendulum's Tier 0 formats manifested in Performapal Pendulum, there were almost no locks to speak of, and one of the most powerful things you could be doing was pendulum summoning a bunch of 4-star monsters and overlaying for a Shockmaster. Or in America, Hope Harbinger? We were just made, it was just material. It was just, you could make anything. Eventually, this became the norm for pendulum monsters. A pendulum deck was one that set scales, pendulum summoned out a bunch of monsters, and then made a bunch of powerful extra deck monsters that weren't necessarily intended to be made with the infinite number of material you could get for just performing a combo that put bodies on board. Metal Foes, Pendulum Magician, Endymion, all of these decks looked pretty similar if you squinted. Nowadays, there's one thing that pendulum decks do. They perform a big-ass monster combo and then use the nigh infinite material that they've summoned as a result of their setup to make a bunch of generic extra deck monsters. The fears of Konami and the community have come to pass in the way that modern pendulum decks operate. Oh, cool, you made Apollosa, Baron. Oh my god, you're setting up a Dagdaline. Oh! Be still my beating heart. After Pepe, there were a couple of historical outliers to this type of pendulum gameplay, but they were bad for a different reason. Oh, in 2016 NAWCQ format, you could play Cleafort Demise, using the pendulum scales as holding facilities so you could card of Demise turn 1 without having to pitch anything. Hooray. Which leads me to gameplay. This is 3, gameplay. Not only is playing against Pendulum an insomnia cure, playing with Pendulum often feels really bad too. Because performing a Pendulum summon requires you to have both a low scale and a high scale, you kind of have to kajigger your deck in such a way that you are almost always going to be drawing one apiece. Sure, some decks are more consistent than others and have the ability to, through one card, set up both ends of a scale with something like a Pendulum Call, but even then it behooves you to have as many monsters in hand as possible to perform your long-ass combo board you saw in a YouTube video. As a result, you often don't have too much space for non-engine cards. Like, you're not going to be able to Pendulum summon out an Abiru or a Drolan Lockbird, and Book of Moon is just a card that could have been a monster for your big, silly combo. So as a result, even if you are piloting Pendulum, frequently, you're just staring at your opponent waiting for them to finish their combo and hoping your hand can include enough gas to beat through it. Post-board, this becomes a huge liability because going first, there's a ton of cards that just read win the game against Pendulums.
Anti-spell fragrance.
Dimension Barrier. Awesome. So somehow we've ended up in a position where both playing Pendulum decks and playing against Pendulum decks can be really, really boring. So
stop making them. Press 1 if that's the answer. Stop making them. They're not fun to play. They're not fun to play against. It's a complicated mechanic that very few niche people in the game actually like. Why are we still supporting this? It's not like Fusion, where there have been many successful Fusion mechanics, Fusion archetypes that people enjoy. See Branded, see Chimera, like Shadows. I guess I'm going a little too far back. You know, it's not like Exceed Chat with like Purely and what's another, Cash Tira, where it's like, man, we're churning. Like, name me like the successful, fun Pendulum archetypes, chat, in like the last 5 years that have fan bases or that people that were critical successes. Name any. I guarantee you can name a ritual deck first, because we can send you. That's not in the last 5 years, and that would also probably not be true, but like in the last 5 years, Metaphors also might not be in the last 5 years. Metaphors from like Dark Illusion, right? That's not, yeah. Metaphors I don't believe is in the last 5 years. Balance, colossal failure. Also doesn't have a fan base, non-existent fan base. Steven Universe is better. Metaphors, okay. I think I just proved my point, chat. In the last 5 years, we cannot name a single successful Pendulum theme. Not one. You can name numerous for Synchro, Ixie, Fusion, Link, maybe even Ritual. So, like, why do we still have this mechanic in the game? Endymion, debatable. I'll give you half a point, because that's the first one that is like actually debatable. Mythical Beast, Endymion and Mythical Beast share the same lore, so it's basically the same thing. Like, they literally, Endymion, Mythical Beast, Spellbook, they all live in, like, the same city, so it's, like, kind of the same thing. Pendulum Magician, not a theme. Well, it's kind of a theme.
Or how do we fix it?
SHS. That might literally be the only one, is Super Heavy Samurai. And also, that didn't exist until literally 3 months ago. Like, that was not a success until literally 3 months ago. Because there was like one fan and he's in this chat room right now. So, or he's in this stream right now. Super Heavy Samurai did not have fans before whatever that set was that gave them Scarecrow.
Well, here's how we've been trying it so far. We've made them all terrible. These days, newly released Pendulum monsters are either unplayable garbaggio because Konami is sidestepping around the pendulum problem of one individual deck that contains every single playable archetype, or they're busted-ass novels that have a million words on them, do a million things, and get banned almost immediately. I think this is a great opportunity to think outside the box in terms of pendulum design. What can pendulum monsters be? Why do pendulum monsters all have to serve the same purpose monster combo that a bazillion other non-pendulum monster combo decks do? What?
Well, what is an example, chat, of like a good... I mean, like, I want to say Magispector was like good design, but it wasn't that successful. Also, it just became splashable in other pendulum decks. People just play Kieran. Like, I feel like Magispector was, because, the Noelle Chef Lady. Oh, the one that's a fusion, but also, like, you never have to fusion summon her. Why is it a fusion at a scale, but you don't actually, like, fusion summon it? Is that the one you're talking about, VP? The one with the hat? Yeah, that you don't, like, summon? Lunalight? Lunalight's not a pendulum deck, chat. It's a fusion deck. It just happens to have 2 scales. So Lunalight does not count. It happens to have 2 scales, one of which people don't even use. That and the one... Oh, they're getting another one. Okay. I got you.
What makes a pendulum...
I think Magispector was kind of cool. Because, like, they revolve all around, like, searching spells and traps. And then the spells and traps require, like, tributing. And then you can pendulum them back. And they can't be targeted. Like, those kind of...
deck different than a Synchron deck, for instance. And truth be told... I think Konami's not doing a terrible job. The last couple of playable pendulum archetypes have been different. Abyss Actor, for instance, has to play the spells by design. So as a result, they've baked in a lot of one-card combos and enabled you to draw as few pendulums as you want, though still execute a combo. Your end board isn't going to have Apollousa Baron on it, but it is going to be able to interact with your opponent in ways that are, at minimum, different than other decks. Memorelia is another interesting concept. What if instead of the pendulum zone just being where you put...
I've actually never heard this that word pronounced.
Different. Abyss Actor, for instance...
Sleepy Girl deck.
And enabled you to draw as few pendulums as you want, though still execute a combo. Your end board isn't going to have Apollousa Baron on it, but it is going to be able to interact with your opponent in ways that are, at minimum, different than other decks. Memorelia is another...
He's definitely right, chat. I dueled against this deck one time. I did not want to read any of the cards. It's definitely not a bunch of spam the board and make extra deck cards. They don't even use the extra deck. Like, it definitely don't feel like a pendulum deck. It just feels like a deck that happens to have pendulum cards. I'm not even sure I don't think he pendulum summoned either.
Another interesting concept. What if instead of the pendulum zone just being where you put one monster that conceivably could have been part of a monster combo, it was a place where you put a little girl to sleep. And then she dreams about big-ass guys. Big-ass beefy fuckers. They hit hard. I like Nemorelia. It's very funny. The new Valmonica monsters are another incredible reimagining of what a pendulum is allowed to be. What if instead of just spaces in the back row, the pendulums represented the angel and the devil on your shoulder, and then you're in the middle making plays based on which one you listen to? Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that, for the majority of its lifespan, has been very derivative. It's largely retread a lot of ground that other card games like Magic the Gathering already started. Which makes sense. Its genesis...
It always comes back to Magic, doesn't it, MBT?
is in being a Magic the Gathering ripoff after all, but to me, pendulums represent one of the first opportunities for Yu-Gi-Oh! To do something uniquely different.
Shut the fuck up, Super Zesty. Dude, I'm sorry, but like, is Yu-Gi-Oh! A Magic the Gathering? I just don't see how. How is it a Magic the Gathering ripoff? When Takahashi was writing Yu-Gi-Oh!, I really don't think he was like, let's make it like this other game. Yeah, no, I don't know. Yeah, you know what? I think maybe it started off. We're like, Magic cards, but I don't know. I feel like that's probably it. Magic is the progenitor of all card games. Is that true? I feel like a Google search would probably say that that's maybe not true. I like when an archetype has one or two pendulum monsters as opposed to the entire archetype being pendulum monsters. But is that a pendulum archetype though? Because that's like Lunalight, or I mean even SHS to a certain extent. Like SHS chat, it's not like you could argue it's not really a pendulum. It's supposed to be a fucking synchro deck. Actually, I mean he didn't even tech. Well, yeah, it's supposed to be a synchro deck to be honest. It just happened to get some pendulum monsters. Amazon has have synchros, or excuse me, have pendulums, do they? All the Lancers, if you guys don't know, chat, like all the Lancers, which this includes Yosenju, Lunalight, Raid Raptor has pendulums, because Shun's he's a Lancer. I think he rejected pendulum, like he didn't want them. DDD, yeah, Yuya, like all the Lancers, all the kids, they all got pendulums when they went to New Domino City, yeah. Except I think Shun was the only one who was like, I don't want him. And hold on, Melodious? No, wait, Yuzu was not a Lancer. Okay, yeah, she sucked too bad to be a Lancer.
It's a type of card that does not exist.
But the other archetypes, chat, that's why they have pendulums. Is because like it's because of the
in any other card game, and almost cannot exist in any other card game. And it's frustrating that historically it's been used to facilitate the same type of monster combos as every other deck. I really appreciate Konami's willingness to step outside of the box in terms of pendulum design and give us things that are more interesting and innovative than just setting up a silly Baron line. I enjoy that they're giving cards reasons to be pendulum, not just slapping the super type on a card and being like, ooh, now it works with amazing pendulum. Wow! To close this one out, I also think it would do a lot of good for the identity of Pendulum if a lot of the generic negation tools that lived in the extra deck just went away. Appaloosa is...
Selza W! Can I get a Selza W in the chat? MVT's basically saying ban Appaloosa and Baron DeFleur. Selza W! Selza Believe! Yeah, it sounds like he's about to say ban Baron DeFleur and ban Appaloosa, which I've said this, I don't understand how you can hate on Floodgates and then you like simp for these cards that like every deck except my shitty deck can make. Like I don't get to fucking summon Appaloosa and Vanquish Soul, so why do you? Just because your deck can shit out a bunch of monsters?
Ow! To close this one out, I also think it would do a lot of good for the identity of Pendulum if a lot of the generic negation tools that lived in the extra deck just went away. Appaloosa isn't a particularly good card right now, but the fact that she exists means that decks like Pendulum that summon a bunch of monsters are always going to be considering her rather than their own in-archetype plays when they're deck building.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? I don't even think Appaloosa is bad right now. She's just like people would rather make Baron DeFleur and Bestial Dispatter because like Bestial Dispatter like those two cards in specifically, chat, like Baron DeFleur, if you look at Vanadium, it can actually extend your combos because you get the negation plus you get the pop. Bestial Dispatter, same thing. You get a negation, but you also get to like summon a monster. So right now, people are playing like the negation cards that also give you more cards. Where Appaloosa is like just strictly negation.
It'd be nice to ban that shit. It'd also be nice to ban Anti-Spell. Why the fuck is Anti-Spell legal? There should not be a card that reads you can't play your deck. That's it. That's all I wanted to say about Pendulum. Feels weird to end one of these praising Konami's recent design decisions instead of lambasting them. I'll leave you on a hater note. There should be Pendulums in the new Speed Duel product. There you go. That's my...
I think I've said this before, chat. Like I don't play Speed Duel at all. I think implementing these new mechanics into the games that were specifically designed to be simpler is like counterproductive. Because like what is, I don't know how that, what is the purpose? If the entire purpose of Duel Links, like if the entire point of Duel Links was just to be a simpler baby-fied Yu-Gi-Oh, like, and but then you add all the broken mechanics and the game gets super fun, like what's the point? Like I don't know. I feel like it's just the opposite of what you made it for, right?
Opinion.
You know what I mean? Good video though. I did enjoy it, chat.